Invitiamo subito Ferran Antolín, che insieme a una folta schiera di colleghi presenta una relazione in cui l'Isolino di Varese è preso come caso di studi per un grande argomento: Tracing the reason behind agricultural change in the Neolithic.
Thank you so much. I start apologizing because I will give my talk in English. I never know if Spanish would be better than English, but I will go for the language of the empire. I will be speaking in the name of a large team and people who are working in Basel, and also people who are collaborating with us, very especially Daria Banchieri. And I would like to thank the first speaker, Professor Remotti, for the introduction on change and what it means in society. I also wanted to speak a little bit about it in the context of farmers, because agricultural change has always been a question for archaeobotanists. But it has been difficult to work through it. Sometimes we could only say we see new crops appearing at one moment. But when farmers need to choose which crops they are growing, we know they take into account many factors. It depends a little bit on the crops they have, the varieties they are growing, and how resilient they are to changes. The storage methods, sometimes these play a role in the crops that are more suited to the techniques you are using. And of course, the appearance of pests, we have to do with the storage techniques also. And evidently, very important, climate change. In case of climate change, and in many other situations, a big factor is also your network. So through exchange of ideas, through imitation, through inspiration, you may decide to adopt new crops. And when you do this research for the past, of course, chronology becomes a very important factor. So this is pretty much what we are doing within the AgriChange project that I am directing at the University of Basel. We are collating data from Switzerland, northern Italy, southern France, and Catalonia for the Neolithic period, but we are also doing new research in selected sites with a focus on sites with waterlogged preservation. We are choosing waterlogged sites because they allow us to do multi-proxy research, and you may know that Basel has a name for this. Our talk today will focus on the site of Isolino, Virginia. I guess most of you are familiar with it. What we wanted to do is to apply methods that were comparable to the ones that we've been using or that have been used in the northern alpine sites. Very importantly, the sieving methods to make sure that the plant remains, insect remains present in the sediments are properly recovered. If anyone is interested, we have a video on YouTube where we show our sieving technique. And also the quantification and recording methods. We are using Arbodat, which is an access database of free use that has been designed in Germany, and a lot of people in archaeobotany are using currently. So Isolino, Virginia is one of the 111 pile-dwelling sites included as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It's located in Lake Varese, and it's known since a long time as an archaeological site since the 19th century. I cannot do justice to the history of the archaeology at the site, but I guess most of you, when you think of Isolino, Virginia, you may think of Daria Banchieri, but you may also think about Bertolone and the famous excavations in the 50s where they found these multiple floors made of wood and different houses, plant remains were found. So we knew that preservation there is excellent. We had available for sampling one of the profiles left by Bertolone. It's this one here, if I am not wrong, which was this area had been covered with garbage and all sorts of stuff. Since then, Daria Banchieri reopened the trench, so we had this profile available for sampling. Unfortunately, the preservation is not anymore that good. We did analyze samples from here, but we did a lot more. So we took as much sediment as possible from this trench, but we also did a lot of coring. Do you see the, you don't see where I'm pointing. Anyway, we did some coring as well. That's where we had really fantastic preservation. So part of the sampling, as I said, focused on this profile. We did a 3D sketch that you can visit on Sketchfab, and then you can really zoom in into the different layers. It's a beautiful stratigraphy that you have here. We did some profile samples from here, and then most importantly, we did some kind of transects along the island to try to cover different settlement phases through coring. And we did two types of coring, the thin ones that you have to your left and the thicker ones to your right when it was possible and when everything went well. So we had enough material to analyze. And the work is still ongoing, but we have produced quite a lot of information. So the first thing we did after sorting plant remains was dating them. And we now have 45 radiocarbon dates between 5,000 and 3,700, which show a very nice settlement pattern at the site. We have distinguished these four phases for today's presentation, which have some spatial patterning at the site. So the earliest phases between 5,000 and 4,700 are towards the northeast of the island. And then somehow there's a movement of the occupations towards the south of the island, around 4,300, and then they continue occupying this area until 3,700, which we found in this core here. So it's actually, I didn't mention it, I just took it for granted. It's a completely artificial island. It developed with human occupation, and now it's a beautiful place where you can go and have lunch. And so the archaeobotanical results are so far very important. So we have more than 120 plant taxa found, mostly uncharted, which is not the usual case unless you have waterlogged preservation. And we analyzed so far more than 35,000 plant remains. Where we have well-preserved layers, the densities of remains per liter of sediment are very high, over 10,000 remains, which is fully comparable to the sites north of the Alps. These are the different types of samples that we took. You can see the difference between the profile samples in that trench that still is open or that is reopened and was once excavated by Bertolone. The number of remains is very low. There are remains which are not charred. You see them in gray. Sorry, this is the MP column. And then B and C are the cores. So in the cores, we had really massive amounts of remains, and especially waterlogged, but also charred. Like you see in the thicker cores, there's about 2,000 remains per liter of charred grains. So it's rich in all senses possible. So I'm going to focus on the results of these richer cores around the site, where we have the different settlement phases represented. You have the phases at the top right for your guidance, and then I'm showing you these bar plots with error indicators over time. So this is, I'll just break it down for you. We see the evolution of the crops over time. In the early Neolithic, in phase 1, it's basically naked wheat, barley, and poppy. What we have, there's no flax, very few gloom weeds. Flax appears a bit later, around 4,800, and then it continues. And it's especially in phases 3 and 4, around 4,200 to 4,000, that the gloom weeds increase. This is a change that we see in other sites, for instance, in southern France, that we are also studying. When we look at wild plants, what we see is diversity in general. I would like to highlight Chenopodium album, which in Italian it's Farinello comune. It's normally a wheat, but in the early Neolithic it's present in huge amounts and also charred, so it was probably gathered. And then we have phases with more hazelnuts or more acorns. It's just an important gathering activity at the site. But we don't only have plant remains. Because of the great preservation conditions at the site, we are able to study also insect remains. And in this case, I was interested in showing the presence of grain weevil. Cytophilus granarius would be the Latin species. And as you can see in the graph, in phase 1, we have some even charred, but it's in phase 3 where it increases in numbers greatly. Then in phase 4, we haven't found any yet. So that could be very interesting because it correlates with a change from naked wheat to gloom wheats, and gloom wheats in general are more resistant to pests like this one because they are stored in the glooms. They are not stored as clean grain. And as a final proxy, I'm adding here some stable isotope analysis of 44 grains that were done as single grain measurements of barley and naked wheat. And we separated them into early and middle Neolithic. If I should summarize this, I would say that there are not important differences between barley and naked wheat in both phases. But in comparison to other sites, the carbon is very high. It should be showing very humid conditions. So carbon is an indicator for water availability during grain growth. Nitrogen, which you have in the vertical axis, is an indicator for nutrients available. Could be manuring, could be that the sediments are very rich. The nitrogen is not particularly high, but the carbon is, and especially in the Middle Neolithic, we tried to summarize it here in this box plot. I hope, yeah, they are visible. If anything, you have here separate barley on the left, naked wheat on the right, and early Neolithic on the left of each graph, middle Neolithic on the right, and if anything, the conditions seem to get wetter. Within the thresholds that were published by Wallace and others that should be indicative of poorly watered, middle watered, and highly watered crops, they are at the very top, and there are some extremely high values. So I would correlate precisely this increase in humidity with the choice of gloom wheats, which might do better than naked wheat in wetter conditions. So I'll wrap it up in the conclusions by saying that you have a treasure in this site. It's an amazing archaeological site. We could date several episodes of settlement between 5000 and 3700 BC. The preservation is excellent in those layers that have remained covered since they were deposited. It's a pity that this trench is not anymore that well preserved. But we could still obtain some results. We could observe a change in the crop assemblages towards the end of the 5th millennium calibrated BC with more gloom wheats, more poppy, it's better represented, and hazelnuts. And it coincides with an increase in the finds of grain weevil, which, as I said, could be affecting mostly naked wheat, and together with wetter conditions in the climate, it might be that these multiple factors, we cannot compare it now to other sites. We are still collating the information for northern Italy, so we cannot evaluate the social factor here, are affecting this choice towards an increase in gloom wheats in this moment. So the next steps, among others, would be the study of the charcoal remains at the site so that we can reconstruct a little bit the environmental changes and date more sites. We are looking for people interested in having their sites dated, people with grains, and then look for other potential crop changes and reasons behind those changes. So I leave you with the image of some of the grains we use for the stable isotope analysis, and a beautiful quote of Vernon Lee in her book, The Spirit of Rome. When she met the archaeologists and she was talking to them, she was astonished and surprised. The stories were great, but she was not so sure if what we are doing is telling the truth or art. So I just thank you for your attention.